Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminolly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, one of the most horrible books I've ever read, The Laws of the Skies by Gregoire Courtois. So this book was recommended to me by subscriber Troy Tradup, who seems to be, certainly for me at least, building a bit of a reputation of someone who recommends, if you'll pardon the French, fucked up books. So this was a very fucked up book. So how can I describe it? Well, it's easy to describe it actually. So this is a French novel, originally published in 2016 in France, and then published so the English translation was published in 2019. So it's quite recent. And essentially, it's about a group of young school children, six-year-old school children, and three adult helpers, so one teacher and two helpers, who go on a camping trip in the woods and all die. And you know, the fact that they all die is laid out right at the start of the book, so you know what's coming, and that's it. That is the story in its entirety. So you get to know, a bit about the various characters as the story progresses, and as promised, they all die, and it's a fascinating but very horrible book. As a result, it's quite unlike anything I've ever read. It did remind me of a couple of things, which I'll share with you, which may or may not mean anything to people. So the first thing it reminded me of is something that if you're British, you probably will recognise, and that's the TV show Casualty. So there's a British TV show, which I think is finished now, called Casualty, which is set in a hospital in the A&E department. And the beginning of every episode would have some characters you'd never met before, like doing something in their daily life, like going on a caravan trip or going canoeing or something like that. And you would know that there was going to be some sort of terrible accident, because that's what always happened. And then the rest of the story is the people in hospital and all the nurses and doctors trying to save them. This felt a lot like that at times, because whatever character you are watching, you're reading about, something terrible is going to happen to them. You just don't know what that is. So there's kind of a guessing game almost as to trying to figure out what's gonna happen next. So there's that. It also very much reminded me of a short film from the 80s called Elephant, which was directed by the British director Alan Clark. And this is something I saw on TV at the time, in a season of films that were shown, I think on Channel 4 or BBC Two in the UK, that were about the situation in Northern Ireland. And Elephant is a plotless film that I think is about half an hour long, and all it consists of is a number of separate scenes where you meet some characters, and then there is some sort of violent act committed, either by Republican terrorists or loyalist terrorists or the security forces. But every one of these short scenes ended with everybody dying, basically, or certainly large numbers of the characters dying. And the reason it's called Elephant is that the saying was in Ireland was, at the time during the Troubles, that it was as difficult to ignore the Troubles as it was to ignore an elephant in your room. And this film just really drummed home that fact that violence was always there as a threat in Northern Ireland. It was always only around the corner, basically. So this book feels very much like that, in that that something terrible is going to happen to all of these characters. It's flagged up front, and yet it's fascinating to read. And I think it's fascinating partly because of the way it's written. So it has a very interesting style of writing that he uses. And I think part of that potentially is down to the translation. And I did have a couple of issues with the translation. So the word bum, meaning bottom rather than like homeless person, is used a lot in this book, particularly in the kind of the first half of it, to the extent that it gets a little bit annoying. And I suspect that's a translation thing rather than the original text. I'm not sure. But apart from that, it's very well written, and he has this very interesting style where he really pulls the reader in and makes you as the reader aware that you are part of the whole process. Because you are watching, you're an active participant in the whole process of the terrible things that are happening to these children. And I won't go into the detail of what happens and what kind of sparks it off. But basically, it's all of the things that happen are, pretty credible. You can believe that all of these things would have happened, and there is a chain of events that gradually ramps up, and it does, as horrible and horrific as it is, it does make sense that because of a couple of events that happen early on in the book, that all of these characters end up dying. That's not a long book. I think it's less than 150 pages, but because of the subject matter, and particularly the fact that it's a lot of the deaths are of young children, it's clearly very troubling, and I definitely wouldn't recommend it to everybody. Anyway, let me read you a passage from it, so you can get a sense of the kind of style of the writing. And this is one that's from about halfway through the book that I thought was quite powerful and quite good, but also quite representative. The cries of the children calling for their mothers had filled the space and made everything tremble. Tremors that reached the most obtuse of sensibilities, moving anyone who could detect the vibration. That is, anyone other than you, dear reader, who have the privilege and the curse of grasping the unbearable bird's eye view of a forest plunged into the darkness of one inconsequential night, from which rise the cries for help of children left to their own devices, and children who have died, or who will die, and whose salvation you can do nothing for. That is your lot, and that is theirs. Tragic roles that each will have to play as best they can until the last page. So you really get that sense that you are part of the overall. You're not just an observer. Well, you are just an observer, but you're more than an observer, because you are emotionally invested in what is happening, and you are therefore part of the story. And I won't pretend to know what he is trying to say in this book, which is apparently pointless, because there is no glimmer of hope. There is no, there's no happy ending. It is just an unrelenting trail of death. And clearly he is trying to say something, and I have been ruminating on what that is. Is it just that life is essentially hopeless and we are all eventually going to die? And if it is that, and perhaps it is, what's the point of giving that self-evident message? But whatever the message is, I found it a very, very impactful book. And there's one particular writing technique he uses, which I thought was fantastic, which is where, so the various characters in the book become separated. So you end up with like 3 or 4 different storylines going on at the same time. And frequently he shifts from one storyline to another one, kind of almost mid-sentence, or certainly mid-paragraph. So it takes you a moment for your brain to catch up and realise that actually he's talking about a different character now. And it's really disorientating, but in a really effective way. I thought it was a brilliant technique. And what it does is it really immerses you with the characters in this, their sense of bewilderment at what's going on, particularly, as many of the characters are young children and just cannot grasp what is happening. It was just a wonderful technique, I thought. And whilst I don't want to give it away, what I would also say is that the end of this book, the last 15 to 20 pages, is just incredible. I was kind of swept up in it anyway, and kind of, it was making me think and making me feel anyway. But the last, like the climax of the book, which is just one prolonged horrific scene, is just a stunning piece of writing, I thought. Incredibly impactful, and really makes you reflect on, or made me reflect on, some of the opinions that the rest of the book had given me, and made me rethink those. I thought it was incredibly powerful. So yeah, a really interesting, different, challenging book. Not one that I would recommend unreservedly, because of the subject matter, but I definitely think it's one that's worth reading if you can stomach it. Okay, time for a random book from the shelves. This one is another one with what appears to be children in peril, or maybe it's devilish children in this one. So The Orphan by Christopher Ransom, which was a random charity shop pickup, which I've had for probably 18 months and still haven't read. It looks cheesy as hell, doesn't it? But in quite a good way. I can imagine if this was like a mid-80s zebra paperback rather than a mid-2000s or 2013 UK paperback, it will go for big bucks on eBay. If you gave it a slightly different, or even maybe the same colour cover but kind of embossed, I think it will be a winner that everyone will want to read. So I will give it a try at some point, and we'll report back and let you all know what it's like. So yeah, I still haven't quite figured out what I thought of The Laws of the Skies, but if you've read it and you know what you thought of it, then please do let me know in the comments. I thought it was excellent, but yeah, like as I said at the start, fucked up. But yeah, a very, very good book, definitely. So yeah, let me know if you've read it and what you thought. And as always, I hope you're safe and well. I hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.